It's so good to be with you guys today. So, as mentioned, I'm Madison Gooch. I'm actually local to Louisville, Kentucky. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky and did a fair stint away in Chicago and lived a bit in New York and have come back here now. My husband works for UPS as a pilot there and have lots of family around and a little guy and need that village of support to be able to do the job that I do. So I'm again happy to be with you. I lead our AI and WatsonX practice. If you don't know anything about WatsonX or you don't know what IBM is up to these days, I know there's lots of people that have probably heard about IBM over the course of time, but maybe you don't necessarily know kind of about our practice and where our investments are these days. You'll learn a little bit more about that over the course of the next 45 or 50 minutes or so. So we're going to talk about a super exciting topic today, right, in the realm of AI. So hopefully everybody here, knows a little bit about AI and potentially how it's being used in business, but also how you engage with it on a consumer level, right? There's been a lot of buzz about generative AI in particular over the course of the last 18 months. Just by a show of hands, I assume everybody in here has probably tried an app like ChatGPT or Perplexity AI, maybe on your phone, right? And you see the power of what that can do, right? Just with very little information or very little data powering it, right? It's as simple as asking a question and it coming back with an answer. So lots of people are talking about these concepts. But it's our point of view, like IBM has been in the AI space for quite some time. We've been building models, developing software applications, and really helping businesses put those to use in some unique ways. And I'll talk about some of those use cases today. What you see on the consumer side of things, right, in an application like ChatGPT versus what we believe is required to do this well and in a responsible way from a business perspective is a bit different. Okay, and we're going to explain some of those differences today and things that I think as you guys are in business that you need to be a little bit on alert for. One thing about ChatGPT is when it came out, I mean, there was obviously no shortage of news articles, honestly, both good and bad, about the application and what was happening. But I will call it, what it really did for the world was set a standard of experience of what people expect, right? You actually expect your work to be this easy now, because you can go into just a chat function or an application and very simply ask a question or solicit a task to be done, and you expect it to happen, right? So we set this standard of experience that now people all over the globe are trying to figure out for all of these different domains, all of these different workflows, all of these different use cases in their business. How do they get there, right? How do you enable someone like a procurement analyst in a department to simply say, I want to open a purchase order, okay? And back into all of the tasks and the data and the process and the workflows that it takes to do this, right? That's actually really complicated. It's a really complex problem to have to solve. But now, people that are coming into our workforce, they expect things to be this easy, okay? So we have to kind of pick apart and dissect what it actually takes to make this happen at a business level where you have lots of data that's likely stored in a variety of different places. You probably have legacy processes, you have some new processes, you have legacy systems, you have new systems, and you've probably gotten a pretty complicated spider web built in your business today, right? So how do you turn all of that detail and complexity into the simplicity of something like you see here, right? And we'll break that down a little bit. One of the primary drivers and things that you will hear me talk about today, if you saw the title of this, is around being a value creator, okay? And one thing that I have seen a lot in the last 12 to 18 months with generative AI is that everybody's interested in it. It was amazing that when ChatGPT came out, all of a sudden a week later, there were like 700,000 experts that I didn't know existed across the globe, but people were advertising it on LinkedIn, right? I don't know how you become an expert in a week, by the way. I do this every day of my life, including weekends, and sometimes I would not call myself an expert, right? So don't do that if you're one of those people. But, there was a lot of talk about it. People wanted to experiment with it. They have been experimenting with it. They've been trying it out. But there hasn't been a lot of conversation on the value that it really creates, right? So we're going to talk about value and what value actually means, why and how you should use the technology to create value for your organization, okay? We are actually very, very early on in what I would call the hype cycle of generative AI. You see less news articles about it today. That doesn't actually mean that anybody is any further along, okay, in terms of robust enterprise deployment and the value that this type of stuff can create. Quick swap. So IBM has had a very focused point of view over the course of the last 4 to 5 years on why we invest in AI technology and what we believe it should do for business. And we believe that employee productivity will really be the #1 driver of why people will begin to use these technologies. There's a very interesting set of research. IBM actually has the largest corporate research organization across the globe. Okay, let me say that again. The largest corporate research organization across the globe as it relates to AI. I bet you don't actually think of IBM's name when you think of that, but I hope you do after this presentation today, right? There is an arm in this research organization that is called the Institute for Business Value. And this is a set of researchers that specifically focus on survey techniques, scientific techniques to determine, with all of the new technology that's being created, how will people use it, how will they invest, and what are the best areas of how they do that. And all of this research actually is free, right? We produce it, we publish it, and over the course of the past 18 months or so, we've done about 4 of these studies of 3,500 different CXOs across the globe from different industries, big shops, right? Big enterprise shops, think like big banks on Wall Street, all the way to like mom and pop's cabinet shop in Dallas, Texas, right? To say, how are people going to put this stuff to work as it relates to employee productivity? And you'll see a small sampling of this research on the right-hand side about where people are embracing things like generative AI, foundation models, and large language models across different domains within the business. So this starts to give us some insight into where is the real opportunity, okay? And what this specific statement is saying on the right-hand side is that not only will people experiment with technology in these domains, but this is actually where budget will be aligned because there's a value case that has been done that people can paint a very clear line between points A and B to say, if I invest X, I will generate Y return for the business, okay? Technology isn't really good enough, guys, just to do a science experiment with and to waste a whole bunch of time. But you wouldn't believe how many companies that I engage with that I see them do just that, right? And they think about value last instead of value first. I'm going to kind of make an argument today that I think we should reverse the subject there. So let's talk a little bit about AI. The majority of AI today, and AI, by the way, is a big term, right? I want you to think about AI as how we leverage the best of data and how we teach machines to interact and to reason like humans do. It is not a replacement for humans. Let me say that again. It's not a replacement for humans. So all of the news stories that you hear about, oh my God, all of this stuff is going to take over every single person's job. Not the case. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that has evolved inside of IBM today, okay, with some stories of how we're putting AI to use. But that's really what it is, right? It's about how we scale, how we be more productive, how we are more efficient by teaching machines to reason and to learn like humans do. And AI is also not a new concept. There's lots of traditional machine learning and traditional like natural language processing techniques and things that have been out there for quite some time. But the hype in the last 18 months has been around foundation models, okay? And foundation models is a term that was coined by Stanford, actually, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about what a foundation model is. A large language model is a type of foundation model. You may have heard large language model if you have looked at things like GPT, right? Or if you've looked at some of the Google models that are out there or some of the Meta models that are out there called Llama, okay? Large language models. AI has been in practice for a really long time, okay? So again, we're kind of at the beginning of the hype cycle of generative AI and using foundation models. Yet, what the research actually tells us is that by the end of 2025, about 1/3 of the AI that will be in production inside of businesses will be powered by these types of models that we're going to talk about next, right? By foundation models and by generative AI. So beyond just the experience layer of what we talked about and having tasks be very easy to complete, right? Being able to type into natural language a transaction that you want to make, a piece of information that you want to solicit. Why are people interested in generative AI? Do you guys know the science and the technicalities behind why people are interested in this approach and interested in these models? From a business perspective, what we saw with traditional AI is everything had to happen in a bit of a silo, okay? You had to have a data science team, a data engineering team. You had to have all of these resources go and gather data. They then had to annotate the data, filter the data, go through and do some data quality exercises before they ever got around to actually building or tuning or training a model. And everything had to happen independently. So this is a massive amount of resource. It's also a massive amount of time just to get any type of outcome. There was a study done that I will never forget this statistic, right? Because I laughed when I read it because I was like, how could this be true? That it was a study done that said, on average, a data scientist stays at an organization and a corporation for about 1.4 years at a time. And you know how many models that they actually produce or operationalize during that 1.4-year time period? 0.7. And I go, not really sure how you operationalize 7/10 of a model. Like, because a model is a model is a model, right? But think about that. Do you know how much those resources cost? Like a big bank on Wall Street, okay? A pretty penny, $500,000 in terms of benefits, cash, equity that you might give to these folks. And they did jack squat for you while they were there for 1.4 years. To me, like we talk about value, that's a really bad investment, right? Logic should sort of proceed. But generative AI gives us this opportunity, right, to say we can actually amortize the workload up front that is required for these people to do to generate an outcome. So all of the data gathering, all of the data annotation, all of the things that had to be done to begin to build a model, we kind of take care of that process with a foundation model, because that's what a foundation model is. We basically used a whole bunch of available information or data that's out there. We have pre-trained the model, and you actually have a base to get started with. Then you can tune and you can train and you can do different things on top of that model. So we're amortizing, by our best estimate, about 70% of the workload that traditional data science and AI engineering teams had to do in order to generate a result. Okay, that's a massive value proposition in and of itself. And I would tell you that 12 to 18 months in to having these conversations with businesses, there's no debate anymore. Everybody's going to use foundation models. Everybody's going to use large language models. Everybody's going to use generative AI. It's now about how do you make the choice about what tech stack to use, how responsibly that you need to do it, and the value proposition and cost effectiveness around the choices that you make. Okay, so we'll dig into that a bit today. Let me talk about some of the most common tasks that I see implemented or experimented with by businesses today in the generative AI landscape. And you won't actually hear me talk about any of these things as use cases. This is a very important point here. All of these things are functions and they're tasks, okay, that the technology does. You would need to combine a few of these for the use cases that we're going to get to on the next slide, okay? Very important point, because you hear a lot of this in the market about, oh, well, you know, I am doing a retrieval augmented generation use case. It's not a use case, it's a function, it's an architecture. There's lots of architectures for things like RAG or retrieval augmented generation. But this is bar none the most popular thing that has been going on in the generative AI landscape for the past 18 months, okay? Does, just by a show of hands, are you guys familiar with retrieval augmented generation or RAG? Okay, some of you are. So for those of you that are not, on the most basic level, you can think of it as a question and answer system. And you can also think of it as an architecture whereby you are always feeding the most relevant data into the architecture, okay? You want to be able to do the chat GPT-like experience, right? Of you want to ask a question, you want to solicit an answer, but you actually need to make sure that that answer is based upon your business documentation, your policies, and the things that you put in place, okay? As opposed to relying on a model that may be trained on other data that has nothing to do with what you do, okay? So there's many architectures around RAG. This is a great place to get started. I would kind of make an argument that we've got to extend out of just an information retrieval mindset into doing real work, okay? And fundamentally executing real actions and transactions based upon AI, which is possible today with things like autonomous agents, okay? Which we'll talk about here in a moment. Summarization and content generation. IBM's platform of WatsonX, we do all of these things too. Now, summarization and content generation, we're probably going to think about in a little bit different way from a business perspective than what you might. You can go into WatsonX, and if you want to generate some, great song lyrics that are based off of Taylor Swift, like you can still do that. But we're going to think about content generation as being very business focused. So how do we maybe do things like generate job descriptions for an HR talent recruiter, right? How do we do that based upon data? How might we actually help a retailer reduce the amount of small claims that they have coming in by saying, okay, well, you go to small claims court for 1,000 claims that look pretty similar. 70% of the drafting work that needs to be done by a contract lawyer could just be done by AI, right? And then have those contract lawyers actually pay attention to the 30% of the customization element that is needed in order to win the claim, right? We can't change the legal process, but we can apply AI and automation to make this much more fluid and much easier, okay? So think about use cases like that these functions and capabilities are available on the platform. Then I would tell you on the bottom tier here, there's a lot of opportunity with generative AI around unstructured data. Okay, we've been able to do a lot with unstructured data just with traditional machine learning and NLP techniques, but it's taken us a long time, okay? We may be able to do it on a singular document. Generative AI provides us a lot of capability to be able to do this across the board with different types of unstructured data. So when we think about use cases that contain functions like entity extraction or clause extraction, I want you to think about contract intelligence use cases, okay? I do contracts all the time at IBM. I can tell you I'm not a lawyer, so every time I get to did I write anything in this contract that would violate like our anti-corruption policy? Like, I don't know, but that's a great use case for AI, right? I don't have time to go through all those things. A lawyer doesn't have time to go through all of the edits to the contract that I may make, but it's a great use case for how we could leverage generative AI, understanding those policies, and then make sure that we're doing a comparative analysis to ensure that those things map back. The last thing I'll talk about on here is a lot of use cases around code, okay? There is a massive play here to make developers more productive, to be able to explain code, refactor code, generate code, transform code of all types with generative AI, okay? And IBM actually has some very specific foundation models that we've created for code. If anybody in here uses a mainframe within their business, or you have, ever seen a mainframe or anything like that, you know that it is, COBOL developers are not like a dime a dozen on the street anymore. They're kind of hard to find. This is a great use case when you have scarcity of talent to say, how do you apply AI and automation to modernize that code, to keep your code well equipped, to keep your applications up and running for what you need to do in that landscape, right? So this is also a big opportunity for enterprises and driving developer productivity. Now, if we get into use cases, you'll see all sorts of things. And all of these are actually real examples of what IBM has done in the AI space with a set of clients. And I'll kind of break it down for you categorically, and we will send this content out so that you guys have it and you can do some further exploration on your own. This is really important from a use case perspective, and IBM's focus layers of where we believe people will generate the most value in terms of leveraging AI. The first is how we think about customer-facing functions and experiences. This is anything from what we do in the customer support space or the call center space to how we drive things like hyper-personalization through marketing activities. Is there anybody in this room that actually really enjoys calling a call center and going press 1 for English and press 2 for Spanish and then getting like 17 other prompts after that? Do you guys enjoy that? You don't have to do that anymore, right? So IBM has, been kind of long-standing research and development in the voice space and things like speech to text and text to speech, where we actually power those natural experiences, okay? Right here in our hometown, Humana actually leverages IBM Watson. They were one of the first to ever actually leverage these voice solutions. And now all of the providers that call in and talk to Humana, sometimes they don't even know that they're talking to AI, but they're talking to Watson, okay? To fulfill needs that they have for their claims, membership categories, dental, benefits, etc., okay? Vastly improving the customer experience. So that's kind of one domain. Think about the call center, think about customer support, think about marketing activities. Then I would say that there's a big opportunity here in what I call back office functions, okay? So everybody has an HR department. Most people have a procurement department. Most companies have a supply chain, whether you think of supply chain in a traditional form or not, right? But all of these back office processes, they have a lot of opportunity where generative AI can be applied. And you can generate operational efficiencies. And if something took you 138 clicks today through the use of AI and automation, it may take you 26 tomorrow. That's productivity because then we free up very domain-specific skill sets to go focus on other elements other avenues of opportunity where we may be able to generate revenue or drive more value for the company, okay? So that's layer 2. Layer 3 exists within what I would call the technical systems space, right? So thinking about IT development and operations. How do you ensure that your applications are always, at the level of performance that they need to be? How do you do things like instantiate developer productivity regardless of the coding languages that you use within your business? And how do you keep all of your apps in tip-top shape, right, through the use of AI and automation? And then finally, core business operations, all of the elements that make a business run. So an example I would give you here is I want you to think about like a traditional banking platform, somebody like a Fiserv, right, or an FIS that is doing payments. Like every time we swipe our card, right, there's a transaction that happens, there's a data transfer that happens, okay? Those are very, very powerful core systems, okay? We get into the meat of how we use AI and automation to redefine and redesign some of those core systems so that potentially we prevent fraud from happening in different ways, right? New techniques as part of those core business systems. So IBM's pretty heavy in the enterprise space. We do a lot of work in what I would call like this layer over here can be pretty complex in terms of how people will use AI and automation. But there's use cases across the board, so there's no shortage of opportunity. If you're sitting here today and you're like, I don't even have a use case for AI. Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet, okay? All right, so let's talk about, we've heard a lot of goodness about AI, but I told you early on, we're still very early days in the hype cycle of generative AI. And there's a lot of people that are holding back from deploying some of the most valuable use cases that they could for their business. And now you kind of wonder why. Like the technology today, it's so accessible, right? Anybody can get on, they can ask a question in an application like Perplexity.ai or ChatGPT. Why would people be holding back, right? What are the barriers that we actually need to remove so that people can do this well at scale? A couple that you'll see are here. If you're anything like most of the companies that I talk to, they've probably had 10 years worth of effort to make sure that they consolidate and they clean up all of their data and it's in one location and it's still not, right? Data exists in a lot of different places. It's really hard to clean it up. It's really hard to bring it together. And I think we've kind of had a bit of a fallacy in terms of the enterprise landscape whereby people thought they could do some type of data transformation activity or exercise as a one-time thing. And the problem is the volume, the veracity, the velocity of data that they create continues to grow. So if you don't have an iterative framework around this in your business, that can be a very hard problem to solve. And ultimately, your AI is going to only be as valuable as the data that you feed to it. The model itself isn't really going to do much for you, right? So data is a critical part of the landscape of being able to generate value out of AI. People still struggle with this. Lots of people still lack platforms, tools and platforms to actually do what they need, the model development, okay, and the data cleansing, the data quality elements that we talk about. Skills. Skills are kind of hard to come by in this space, right? Remember what I just said about data scientists? Some of them, they're there and then they leave faster than they can ever be productive. And these resources are also expensive. But I would tell you that, those are kind of surface level things that you hear. I think the hardest part in the skills landscape is the variety of skills that you actually need to successfully bring one of these projects to life. If you're looking at 5 different new skill sets that you need to be able to, generate a use case, one that we just talked about, that's very difficult to come by in the market, and it's very expensive, right? So we have to define kind of new frameworks, new partnership frameworks, whereby we can actually give the clients that we serve access to the skills that they need to be able to iterate and to be able to prove value very, very quickly. And then finally, I would tell you the biggest impediment to people doing this is trust, right? I'm going to take questions at the end, by the way. The biggest impediment to businesses doing this at scale today is trust. And trust is defined in a number of different areas, right? People are still worried about bias that exists in the models. People are worried about the explainability of these systems. There are regulations that require you to explain what you're doing with AI, okay? People don't have the tools and frameworks and systems to do that today. They're worried about ethics, okay? What use cases should they be leveraging AI with and which should they not, right? All of these things go hand in hand. And while lots of people believe that there are big opportunities, until they can actually instantiate a layer of transparency and explainability in their business that they're comfortable with, they will hold back on deploying use cases that could be of the most value, or deploying use cases that would take in their sensitive, proprietary, and regulated data, right? So I think IBM actually has the best answer in the market to this problem, okay? And I'll talk a little bit about it when we go through things today. But let's talk about, like, if we just double click on the risk that exists here, this is something that I get a lot of interest from clients around, because we know that the risk exists and we know that we talk about it at a pretty high level, right? We say words like trust, we hear words like responsible AI, we hear words like ethics, we hear words like explainability, bias, fairness, like we hear all those great things, but what does it really mean, okay, in terms of some of this new technology and bringing that to life inside of a business? So we said, hey, Gen AI offers many benefits. That's awesome. The risk that you see on the right-hand side, about 70% of the risk, guys, in the use of generative AI versus traditional AI is the same. Same as what it has been. But there are very few companies out there that have actually instantiated a platform by which they can even solve for some of the traditional risk, okay? Less than 10% of companies today have what we call an AI governance framework. That means, very simply put, that there's probably people all over your organizations that are using AI, you just don't know how, right? So we gotta have a choice to make. We either do this well and we instantiate a framework where we can figure out what people are doing, we drive a level of transparency about it, we put the right guardrails in place and we enable people to use AI, or we don't and they go do it anyway. And you don't have the level of transparency or the right amount of data to control what that looks like and to mitigate the risk for your business, right? Now, at the top here, right, when we talk about new risk or we talk about amplified risks, there's lots of new things in the landscape of generative AI that no technology company has had the ability to solve for today. Probably the most popular one on this list is hallucinations. You guys know what hallucinations mean? It means like when a model answers a question that is not based upon any data that it was fed, and it's the wrong answer, right? We're leading someone down the wrong path, okay? IBM actually developed a model about 18 months ago that is a very small model that runs on CPUs that does hallucination detection across anything that goes through our platform. Just to give you the level of transparency, it doesn't mean that it's going to mitigate hallucinations 100% of the time, but you're going to know when it does, and then you're going to have the capability that you need to say, hey, don't move forward with the output of what was created here, right? You have things like intentional bias. If you're using a model like GPT today, that was created behind a closed curtain. You have no idea what went into that model, right? Even their CTO that gets on the Wall Street Journal can't explain that to you. Does that make you very comfortable, right? Who knows what data has been fed into the model? Who knows how much control do you actually have over the output of those things? So when you solve for this, we will actually open up and we will become a catalyst to help people do even better things that drive more value with AI. And this is kind of counterintuitive to the way that we've thought about this stuff, right? People did something about data governance when there was a problem. If somebody like got a pink slip, they went to jail, or there was a big fine that showed up to the CFO's office, is when we got the RFI that said, can you come help us with data governance? Because I think we really have a problem here. Too little, too late, right? Let's not do the same thing with AI. If we think about this and just turn it as a 180, we put this framework in place and drive the level of transparency that we need, everything else will actually go a lot better for the companies that choose to do this first, okay? And we'll give some examples of that. So I would consider that you ask these questions. When you choose a model or a generative AI platform to use, these are things I recommend you keep in mind. Always ask yourself, how was a model trained? If the model that you're planning to use, people can't properly explain that to you, the data attributes that were put into the model to do the training, I don't care if it was Wikipedia or public data, if they can't tell you what it is, that is a problem, right? Ask, can it be customized? What happens if you put your proprietary data alongside the model? Do they use your proprietary data to reinforce the model and to continue to train the model? You probably don't want that, right? If you're Walmart, do you want your proprietary data going into a model that's reinforced that Kroger can also download from the internet and use? Probably not, right? Logic prevails. Can the platform that you're choosing to use detect and minimize hallucination? Like, do they actually have the AI and automation technology to stop the output of a model in case it doesn't meet certain thresholds? You know that most technology companies that compete with IBM by the names of like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, they don't have any of this technology. They have metrics that allow you to monitor it, but this isn't really a priority for them. Why would it not be a priority for them? They create a bunch of closed models where they don't actually tell you the data that they're using behind the scenes or behind the covers, so this is probably not a priority that they want you to really know about, right? Ask yourself that question. Is it transparent? Can somebody give you like a big long technical paper that says, here's the training techniques that we used, here's how we evaluate the model, here's what it looks like from a compliance perspective, all of the regulations that we all are beholden to from a federal level, a state level, even a local level that may happen to us at some point in the future? Do you actually have a transparent point of view of how the AI that you're using stacks up against this? Is it safe? Like, who has control over all of the model inputs, all of the data that goes into these things? And does it support all of the regulatory compliance elements? You may have policies that you want to put in place yourself for your business, right, on the use of AI. Do you have a framework by which you can do that? You can control that, you can automate that, and you can understand the compliance thereof, okay? All right, so let's keep going just a little bit here. These are 5 things, like if I had to distill down on a slide, these are 5 things that over the course of, I think I was actually counting this last night, and I think over, I think I went back to like January of 2023, and over the course of the last 18, 19 months or so, I think I've had like 789 conversations with different enterprises across the Americas landscape about generative AI. And these people have been banks, retail companies, healthcare institutions, healthcare insurance companies. They've been at local levels like universities, school institutions, all kinds of people, all right, that have had conversations with AI about. And if I had to tell you 5 things that I think I could summarize that have come out of these conversations, these are the 5 things that I would tell you that are going to be some of the most important in terms of building and scaling AI within companies overall, okay? Number 1, there will not just be one model that people embrace. I think people thought this when ChatGPT came out, right? Everybody that I went and talked to for like a 9-month time period said, oh yeah, by the way, I'm using OpenAI, I'm using GPT. That's awesome. They're not going to solve every use case. These models are built and they are designed to do different things. You have instruct-based models, chat-based models, you're going to have multimodal models, you have code models, you have time series models. All of these things will do different things for the business. So you have to embrace a platform that is going to enable you to embrace multiple models that do different things well, okay? Key in point 1. Number 2, I would call multi and hybrid cloud, okay? Over the past 4 weeks, I have had 10 banks come back and say, hey, you told us about 6 months ago that all of this AI technology you've created, you can deploy in our data center, or we can have control over where it goes and the data inputs into the technology. Can you come tell us more about that? Because all of a sudden, we kind of want to use some of our sensitive data in the landscape of these large language models and of generative AI, and we're unwilling to go put it on a public cloud provider. Help us understand how we do that. I think embracing this notion that there is not going to be one platform or one cloud, it is really going to be a multi-cloud and a hybrid cloud architecture in which every single company is living in as it relates to AI is also an important acknowledgement. Thirdly, governance. I'll talk a little bit about governance here in just a moment. This is everything from the risk mitigation that we just talked about to lifecycle governance, understanding for the models that you're using, the data that you're using, the techniques that you're using, the coding languages that you're using, all of the compliance policies, that the compliance and the policies that you guys have to be beholden to. Do you have a platform to actually help you understand how that is evolving inside of your organization, right? Governance is going to be critical to doing this with confidence at scale. There's no way to do this, guys, today from a manual point of view. I still talk to tons of banks on Wall Street when I ask them the question, by the way, how do you actually map that all of the models that you're creating, all of the data science work that you're doing, how do you map that to all these policies that you have to comply with? And you know what they typically tell me? Oh, we have a group of about 30 data scientists that sit down over a conference table and they get a big Excel sheet out and they go and map every step of their process. And I go, well, number 1, that's really boring for the data scientists. Like, that's not what they were hired to do. Number 2, that's extremely error prone. What happens when you have to give that information or that data to a regulator or an auditor, right? People need the technology in place to be able to do this with transparency, but to also drive productivity in their business, right? I just had a bank tell me last week, they go, we're going to hire about 15 more model validators, okay, just to do that type of work that I just mentioned, because we're growing so much in our use of AI. I said, how about you just use technology? Whatever you were going to pay those 15 model validators, I guarantee you could use a piece of technology for, and it would go to a lot better work, right? Hire the model validators to actually do things that will create value for your business. Number 4 is all about value, okay? So we've got to start thinking less about just the experimentation of the technology and why we're doing the experimentation of the technology. What kind of value does it create for a business? At IBM, I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what we call our own client zero story and how we're deploying lots of this technology at scale. And our operating framework for how we do this, bear in mind, we're a 300,000 person company, right? So this is not been an easy thing for us to set up by any means, but it's pretty amazing how we do it. We table a use case, and if within 2-week time period, the unit that has to fund the use case, if we cannot come up with a 3x return on investment for what it's going to take within a 2-week time period, total all-in investment, we table the use case and move on to something else. We say no sweat, but we're not going to sit there for 6 weeks, right, trying to make this thing come to life because somebody thought it was a shiny object or a good idea. If it doesn't drive value, just move on, right? We have to think about how we scale for value. And then finally, data matters. If you don't prioritize your data landscape, the transformation of data, the quality of data, the cleanliness of your data, this will be a very, very short game for you. The game that we're all in with generative AI, yes, technology is moving very quickly, but it really is more like a marathon, okay? We have to do it the right way, guys, and there's no escaping all of the work that has to be done with the data landscape and the harvesting of that landscape that enterprises will need to continue to do, okay? So I'd like for you guys to take away thinking today about how to be an AI value creator versus just a user, okay? You're a user if you're using something just like an app of ChatGPT and not thinking about how you can apply many of the principles that we just talked through to create more value for your organization. How do we know this? Did you know that nearly all of the available public data today, so think like Wikipedia, think things that you find online just in very public sources, even think about us as a state entity and all of the data that we put out there for citizen consumption, okay? Every bit of public data is almost available and represented in foundation models that have been built today. That's amazing, right? It's all available. But did you know that less than 1% of any data that a business creates is represented or populated in a foundation model or being used with a foundation model, right? People might look at this statistic and say, well, that's wild. And I look at this and I say, that's your opportunity. Because data is the biggest competitive advantage that your company will have. The data that you create, what makes you you as a company, we've got to figure out how to apply it in this landscape as well. And the way we talk about this at IBM is choosing the best base model in generative AI to work with, okay? So remember what I said on the last slide. You have to have a multi-model platform because one model isn't going to do it all. It's not going to do all of the use cases that you're ever going to want to do for your business. But this piece is really important. Choosing a base model to start with that you may then apply your proprietary data to train and to tune the outcome of what you're looking for. We think that you need a base model that is transparent, where someone will tell you what are the data inputs that were used to train, what were the techniques that were used in the training process, what were the evaluation techniques, and how compliant is the model, how transparent is the model, right? It's important to choose that. We also think it's really important to choose a model that is smaller in nature than a really big model. Why would we say that? Go back to the value point. You know how much infrastructure that would take someone to run a 400 billion parameter model versus a 13 billion parameter model? I can't tell you the amount of conversations I've been in with businesses who have come and said, hey, does IBM actually have an answer for using a small model, some training and tuning techniques that you could use to adapt it to my data because I'm on this experiment with GPT-4 and I am now paying more to run the model for a small subset of the workload that I have than the value it's ever going to create. Okay? That's what we're talking about when we say choosing the best base model, right? You got to know the ingredients that went into the model because you know the ingredients that you're putting on top of the model. You got to know the recipe for how this is all being mixed up and the output that it will create, okay? So we have a platform where we help enterprises do this today. And I'm actually going to show you just a couple of demos of the platform rather than kind of slotting in a bunch of charts around it. But let me explain to you kind of the broader landscape of what we do. There are really kind of two core parts to what we do with WatsonX. And WatsonX is our AI brand, but it's also the platform, okay, that we sell to businesses and companies to do things here. The first part of this platform is what we call WatsonX.data, and this is a data lakehouse, okay? So I heard some people talking about things like Snowflake and whatnot before, but this is very similar technology, right? Combining the best of what we have from a data warehousing perspective with a data lake perspective. We do lots of virtualization, data virtualization in this capability, and we have a lot of AI and automation that is applied to make the data cleansing process easier for when you're looking to run very high-performant workloads around generative AI. Second layer of the platform is what we call WatsonX.ai, and I'm going to show you just a capability that exists in WatsonX.ai in just a moment, but I want you to think about this as the place where AI engineers or data scientists come, and this is where you train and you tune and you build and you deploy all different types of AI models, not just Gen AI or not just the use of foundation models or large language models, but also traditional ML and NLP models. And then finally, WatsonX.governance is woven through the fabric of everything that we do, okay? If you use a product from IBM, you're going to be seeing some of the WatsonX.governance capabilities, which I'll explain in just a moment, kind of the breakdown of how we look at that. So hopefully this will look kind of familiar to some of you. If you could see what's going on here, this is kind of a reasoning exercise. This is WatsonX. You can actually go in and do things from a structured, a freeform, or a chat-based perspective. Hopefully, if you guys have used ChatGPT or Perplexity, this looks kind of the same. We've got different models that are part of our platform. IBM actually had the first commercial relationship with Meta, so all of the Llama models can be found in our platform, and the first commercial relationship with Mistral. If you guys are familiar with their open source models, they're a French company. They have a lot of actually phenomenal models when it comes to reasoning tasks. And so we actually plumb those into our platform because, back to multi-model, right? It's important for people who use our platform to have choice and to be able to find the best model to do the work that they're looking to do. So this was a reasoning exercise, right, that we gave to WatsonX. You can actually choose the model in the top right-hand corner. And it's pretty cool because it says, like, John has 2 apples, gives 2 to Cindy. Cindy eats 1. You know, Bill has a pear. John has, 14 things over here. Tell me what Cindy ends up with at the end of the day. And instead of just giving us an answer, it actually goes through and says, here's how we solve the problem, right? I use this stuff in my day-to-day work all the time, okay? To answer questions, to do research, to generate email responses, like to do all kinds of things that are just menial tasks that at the end of the day I'm depleted and I don't have enough energy to do. I use this. So we can solve reasoning problems. We could do things like generate a new marketing campaign with WatsonX, right? I could say generate a 5-step omni-channel marketing campaign about a specific subject, and it's going to come out with a strategy document of what that looks like. You know that people inside of IBM that work in marketing, they used to spend like 4 to 5 days generating a marketing campaign. I'm like, please don't ever do that again, right? For my business, please don't ever do that again. Just use this. Let's use it as a starting point, and then let's customize the 20% of what we need to customize. Because why? It's pretty comprehensive, right? Pretty comprehensive in terms of what it comes back with. We can do things like, what are 10 ways? What are 10 fundamental use cases of how generative AI can be applied in WatsonX, and what are we good at, right? This actually helps us do a lot of comparative analysis about the data that's fed in and built into the model, about where we might have strengths or weaknesses as compared to other platforms, okay? So hopefully this type of stuff looks pretty familiar and it's not so foreign to you about what maybe the WatsonX platform is or what it does, okay? You'll see a little bit here, just a bit more about WatsonX.ai and what we provide in this layer of the platform. One thing that I'll focus on is all of kind of the typical stuff that you would see or that you should expect to see, like our foundation model libraries, the models that we make available on our platform are found here, the prompt lab, which you just saw an example of and you see kind of going on this side. The thing I want to focus on here, though, is some of the tuning techniques that are pretty novel to IBM and what we've created inside of IBM Research, all with the point of view that we've got to help businesses and enterprises put their data to work in unique ways. So we invented something that's called InstructLab. For all of you that may be, kind of on the more technical side of the equation and interested in this, InstructLab, we actually donated part of it to the open source community. There's a project out there that you can get involved with and you can read about, but it is a novel training technique that we use to improve the performance of our own foundation models, okay? And so we use this training pipeline, we feed like 3 or 4 examples to InstructLab, and then we use large-scale synthetic data generation on the back end to generate like millions and millions of Q&A curriculum and different taxonomies that we then feed into different teacher models, critic models, and eventually get to a student model where we are able to adapt Granite and train and realign, Granite is our foundation model, into unique downstream tasks. And so we said, you know what, we're doing this to improve our foundation model. We actually came up with this technique over the Christmas holiday. I know it sounds very random, but there were like 6 researchers that stayed in a closet over the Christmas holiday and like they came up with this technique. And we were like, this is a pretty darn good technique and we actually think it's what the world is looking for, right? You know the other thing that we did? Anybody ever play on Hugging Face in here? You guys know Hugging Face and the models? Okay, so how many models are there on Hugging Face today? I haven't checked. Lots. Like, it was like 584,000 when I looked like 2 days ago, okay? That's a real problem, because you know what's on Hugging Face? There are not actually that many models. It's just that somebody's gone and like downloaded Llama 3 and they've like, done some update, forked it in some way, and then they've republished it to Hugging Face. So that creates what we call like a model frenzy. You don't actually know what version of Llama 3 to go download from Hugging Face to use. And we call these models open source, which is kind of ironic. Because it's not open source at all. Like, if you really are familiar with open source frameworks, you're going to think about things like what GitHub did for developers. A framework by which you can choose what to contribute back to the base community versus what to keep as what's unique to you. So we said IBM's actually going to come forward, and through this alliance that we have with Meta, we're going to use InstructLab to actually create an open source framework for generative AI. So InstructLab is also that. It gives people the ability to build and contribute back to a better base model, to parse out what you want to contribute versus what you want to keep as proprietary, and people can do this inside the 4 walls of their own enterprise, right? So you can have kind of an inner sourcing foundation model or an inner sourcing large language model use case, okay? So IBM's bringing that to bear as part of a big, big bet that we've made on open innovation, open architecture, and continuing with open source as a part of what we do. Let me just keep going here as we kind of close out, and I'll take some questions. Really quickly on WatsonX.governance, okay? So I would tell you that if I were standing here 5 years from today, this will be one of the most pivotal technologies that IBM has that differentiates us in the market in generative AI, okay? A couple of interesting nuggets. Amazon recently came to IBM and the partnership that we have and said, we don't have any of this technology, and there are people building models like crazy inside of SageMaker, and we think it's kind of a problem that we don't have this technology, so could we just develop a native integration that anytime anyone builds something in SageMaker, we use this to manage it? That's a pretty big statement, right? Another technology firm saying, we're a little bit behind the board on capabilities like this, but we know that there are things that our clients need. Actually good for Amazon for recognizing that and saying there's a strong partnership opportunity here, right? WatsonX.governance does 3 things. Number 1, it does lifecycle governance. So thinking about the inception of an AI use case, the data that you're using, the models that you're using, all of the evaluation measures that you're using along that use case, and making sure that we have traceability of that at every step along the way, even after the model is retrained, reinforced, etc. Okay, that's piece 1. Piece 2 is all around the risk management or the risk mitigation layers. So all the models and the metrics that we build to help you understand the health of what's going on with the AI that you're using. So bias detection, fairness, okay, hallucination detection, all of those elements that we talked about. We've got about 50 models that exist inside of WatsonX.governance today that we will do automated monitoring of any model that you use, not just a model that exists in the WatsonX platform, but if you want to use WatsonX.governance to govern something like GPT or Gemini, a Llama model, whatever it may be, right? You have the ability to do that inside of this platform. And then thirdly, it's all about compliance. So you guys may have heard of things like the EU AI Act, the Data and AI Privacy Act. that was passed in Canada, and I think that there will be more regulation coming in the US probably faster than we can really blink, right? I have been in a lot of policy depositions and a lot of kind of advisory capacities for some states recently on AI legislation that they're looking to put in place. So we've got to get prepared for how we do this now, how we make sure that all of the AI that's being used inside of our business actually maps back to those policies. Now let me give you one more idea here. I also heard somebody talk about Salesforce earlier today. And I spent a great deal of time with Salesforce back in June with their senior leadership of their AI product and engineering division, okay? And specifically on this governance topic. Because you know what else Salesforce told me? Hey, like we market that we have a lot of these capabilities on the web today, and we really don't have many of them at all. We need some help. I go, well, that's positive, right? So what did we do? I'm gonna take questions at the end, so hold your questions for the end. So I said, well, what progress have you guys made in building some of these capabilities, right? And they said, we actually have made a fair bit of progress building and developing some of these capabilities, but we're recognizing that it takes a lot of time and that it's very expensive, okay? So we put a value case together and we said, all right, we'll just kind of expose behind the curtain what it cost IBM to actually build all of the models and the risk management framework here, right? How much did it cost us from a compute and infrastructure, a training, a resource, a data perspective? What did that look like? And so I took it to them and I said it cost us about $350 million to build the models that are inside of WatsonX.governance today. I said, do you guys want to spend $350 million or do you want to spend a lot less than that, right? And just use and experiment with what IBM has. So they are actually building this platform and this framework into all of the Salesforce clouds that you may use. Data Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Sales Cloud, okay? It's a way to help be able to govern and manage when you put marketing and customer data to good work, okay? Finally, the last thing I'll talk about here is what I call the experience layer. And if you go back to the slide that I had where it said like open a purchase order or, you know, define a unique transaction, go back to that experience threshold. These are the people where the opportunity is, right? The things that I just covered in terms of the core technology layers, guys, are really important. But the reality is only about 15% of people within an enterprise are actually going to get any use out of those tools. What are you going to do with the other 85%? You've got to give them a landscape. You've got to give them an application that they feel confident and comfortable interacting in, where their knowledge and their skills can actually be put to good use, okay? So when you look across the landscape of use cases around customer support and customer care, sales productivity, supply chain, procurement, finance, HR, there's opportunities all over the board for the use of AI and automation. So we actually built a platform that is called WatsonX Orchestrate, and this platform was founded upon some of the AI work that we did inside of our own business and very advanced by what we did in HR, okay? I would tell you that after having conversations, even with a lot of our competitors, that we're very advanced in terms of the use of AI inside of the HR community at IBM. And if you think about HR, it's kind of a mini business in and of itself, right? You've got employee support, you've got people to do onboarding, you've got people to do talent acquisition, compensation and benefits. All these are very different skills. So we said, you know what's really missing here is that like there's lots of these back office processes that are like really heavy on process. Like sometimes we don't even know why the process exists today, but like it's heavy on process. What do we do, right? Not really easy just to apply AI across the board. You gotta like actually go pinpoint where should I use AI and automation versus where should I not? So we said we're gonna develop this platform that is pro code, low code, and no code, okay, where we can embrace any skill set. And we're gonna combine a variety of traditional AI skills, generative AI skills, as well as automations, so decisions, workflows, things like RPA. They could even be third-party automations that you've built in a different platform that we read in to WatsonX Orchestrate. And we're going to combine all of these things, right? And we're gonna help people put them to work, right? Because it's not really about what you do over here from an automation perspective and an AI perspective in a silo. We really need to combine those to get the best value proposition that we can. So you see all these integrations at the bottom. These are a small sampling of integrations. What we did inside of this platform was we actually built what are called skills. And we did pre-integrations into these platforms that any business that comes and takes use of WatsonX Orchestrate can leverage. But instead of just building the integrations, we actually built the integrations with associated actions or transactions. So we need to think about if you have a bunch of data wrapped up in Workday, okay, from an HR perspective. What we have designed is a skill would be represented by something like update my address in Workday, which would mean if you went and plumbed that skill, you would give, it's all based on an open API spec, you would give 2 credentials, and then literally you could execute updating your address in Workday. By December 31st this year, we're going to have 5,000 of those skills, more than any I've seen anywhere else in the market, across a variety of different third-party systems. This is really important, team, because all of these companies down here, if you have an investment in them, they're all going to build generative AI into their platforms. You should use it. But all you're doing is creating heftier silos inside of your business as well for you to get out of. I've never met a company that has told me that every single function of what they do inside of HR exists in Workday, or that it all works for them. It becomes a complicated landscape very quickly. This type of platform enables you having to change nothing about your system of records underneath, but be able to actually orchestrate and optimize end-to-end workflows, use cases, and processes across the board at the top, okay? All right, just a couple more things in closing. I'm gonna run through this very quickly. This is what we call Ask HR, okay? And this is what we have developed. This is actually what made us build WatsonX Orchestrate at IBM, okay? And this is our HR experience. If I could tell you a little bit about what we've done in the HR landscape today. This, by the way, is my HR advisor. Like, I don't have a human being that I call anymore for HR. I could get a hold of a human being if I need one, but they don't exist. We had 700 people in a call center, okay, that used to serve in the HR capacity. We now have 75 that staff that call center full time. You know what we did with the other 625, right? We literally took them and we said, they're going to create content and they're going to do inputs into this system. Okay, we created it for them. They're the ones that have the domain knowledge. So there's a whole bunch of things that you could see kind of throughout this demo. Okay, everything from actions that are happening. We, switch conversations. This is like my digital
I've heard good things about
assistant,
the way she's
right,
talking.
for HR.
Very
so
good.
a bunch
So
of
it's
stuff kind of
fine,
going
yeah.
on here, but
I'm
you
not
see,
worried
it's
about
as
it.
easy as just operating in that layer. Like I'm not asking.
What's
you to
after
do
me here? What's after me?
Except for go to this portal and kind of figure it out.
Oh my gosh.
So just in closing, let me just encourage you a little
Avoiding
bit more
types of data
on,
loss.
The value. I told you I mentioned to
Yeah.
you what IBM has done in this landscape around Client Zero, and I think one of the best ways that we can actually help bring this technology to life for people is by saying we've gone and used a bunch of the products that we're selling to the market before we're asking anyone else to do that themselves, okay? Our CEO gave us a pretty big challenge. Within 2 years, he said, you guys need to generate $3 billion of productivity benefit through the use of AI and automation. Not traditional techniques like just cut people and move them around. You need to use the technology that we're selling to the rest of the market in order to do that. So we've taken that very seriously. We have over 40 use cases from a generative AI perspective that are deployed and in production today where we've crossed the chasm from experimentation into doing real work. You see some of what that looks like down here, okay? You would see if my CHRO were standing here today, 40% operating reduction from an HR perspective, okay, through the use of AI and automation. And to date, we've delivered $2.2 billion of productivity benefits. I expect by January, this will be at $3 billion, okay? And it is through the combination of AI and automation and platforms like I just talked about with WatsonX Orchestrate in terms of how we're doing that. I would encourage you ask these questions, okay? Of the vendors that you choose to use in this capacity today, are they putting their own tech to work? This is really the way to tell whether it actually works in the enterprise or whether there's still some holes there that need to be plugged to generate the value that you're actually looking for, okay? So just in closing too, if you don't know a lot about IBM, I want to call this out because there's some things that are happening in the sports space where you can get a little bit more familiar with how we also use AI and automation in the consumer space. The US Open is about to happen, so I don't know if you have any tennis fans here, but IBM actually populates all of the stats, all of the analytics, all of the fan experience, engagement, and personalization measures of what happens at the US Open, as well as Wimbledon, as well as the Masters, as well as if you're about to build your fantasy football teams, you're gonna see some WatsonX integrated into that experience as well. So we have a pretty strong sports and entertainment space. I know a lot of people kind of tell me, hey, don't really know that much about IBM these days because it seems to be more focused on the business side. But pay attention. If you see the commercials, there's a lot more than just commercials and advertising going on there. We're powering a lot of the data and statistics across the globe. Then just in closing, right? To round out kind of who we are as a company and as a brand, maybe you knew IBM from the mainframe days. Maybe you knew IBM from innovations like LASIK surgery. There's been a lot of innovations, right? We're a 114-year-old company. We've reinvented ourselves many, many times. But today, we're an AI company at the core. You probably don't know that IBM actually for 28 years running has more patents than any other company from an innovation perspective out there. And we are number one in the lead for generative AI patents. There's lots of research, there's lots of innovation that's happening behind the walls of our company that we choose to share with the world, right? Lots of leading edge platforms of how we're enabling and how we're empowering businesses. And this is a very exciting space, right? I would be more than happy. I was telling Dawn this morning, she was saying like, oh, do you travel a lot? And I'm like, yes, 5 days a week. And I'm like, it's great being here today because I slept in my own bed last night. I usually don't get a chance to do that, right? But it's awesome. I'd love to talk to you guys more about our values around ethics, trust, transparency, how we do AI in the most responsible manner, how we do it well, and again, how we're focused on eliciting the right amount of value out of the use of this technology and not it just being sort of another shiny toy or another shiny experiment. I think that that's really hard as a business to figure out today with everything that's going on. So if I can be of service to you in any of that capacity, be it through a conversation or some type of experimentation or value exercise, I'm happy to do it. And we have a whole team of folks here. Harper's actually sitting at the desk who support companies in Louisville locally on these efforts as well. Okay. So thanks so much for spending your time with me. There will be, I'm supposed to announce, there is going to be lunch that's set up out here. I think box lunches that you guys can grab, and that's what you're going into next.
Yes. Yeah? Thank you so much, Madison.